Former Meet the Press host David Gregory has released a new book detailing how he is connected with his Jewish faith due to the prodding of his wife, who is a Christian. Why, you might ask, when making a video about someone as banal and uninteresting as David Gregory? The reason is simple. This poorly conceived attempt at a comeback contains within it small examples of just why our media is so ineffective at combating the forces of bad governance, corruption, and oppression. In the Wall Street Journal, and one of his online interviews with fellow journalist and friend Jeffrey Goldberg, it quickly becomes apparent that the two central figures of Gregory's story about living in a multi-faith household are the two people hailing from divergent traditions within that household, none other than Gregory and his wife. Yet, Gregory's hook for grabbing the attention of a potential reader is to say that he never thought deeply about his faith until he was talking to George W. Bush, and the former president asked him, "How's your faith?" This hook shows you what Gregory's actual priorities are. By invoking George W. Bush, Gregory is showing that he has access to friends in high places, which makes him a desirable journalist to employ. Further, since many people, even liberals who hate everything that George W. Bush stands for, accept Bush's claim that he is a fundamentally decent and upright fellow due to his strong faith, Gregory is clearly trying to make the case that whatever you might think about his work, he is a fundamentally nice, honest, and humble human being. More insidious and far less obvious is that by making the argument that American Jews should be more spiritual, Gregory is giving himself the option to become the face of a Christianized Judaism centered on ostentatious proclamations and displays of religiosity, should his attempt at a comeback fail. If Gregory were serious about making a comeback to journalism, then he should probably try to figure out why he failed and why his ratings slid far enough for the vanilla-minded management of MSNBC to fire the inoffensive host after just 6 years of mediocrity at the head of one of the largest network shows in the world. Aside from the facts that shifting social values have lowered church attendance, the slow and steady decline in the older generations who watch Sunday afternoon political shows religiously is declining, and that our unjust economy forces many people to work on Sunday afternoons, there are still things that Gregory could have done that would have helped his ratings. The first and most obvious thing that he could have done is actually hold politicians accountable for their actions, which is supposed to be one of the hallmarks of Meet the Press. The second thing that he could and should have done would have been to ask incisive questions that would put high-ranking officials on the spot and force them to take positions on issues which are not being discussed by the rest of the media. Can any serious person tell me with a straight face that Hillary Clinton's email issue is more important than the rising rate of poverty in the United States? Can anyone seriously expect me to believe that the launch of the iPhone 6 is of more importance than the fact that college graduates are graduating with crippling debt and can't find jobs in their field with a level of pay commensurate with their skill set? Well, in point of fact, there are many people in our society who think that Kim Kardashian's ass is the fifth wheel of American politics, and many of them are in the media. One of them is named David Gregory. So instead of taking on a pressing issue like the impact that money has in political outcomes, David Gregory wants you to know that he's a good guy with a moral foundation. While he could report on the correlation between political contributions from the financial sector and legislation regarding banking, he's instead talking about his personal relationship with Abraham and Moses. He could talk about the potential devastation that global warming will wreak over the next generation, particularly in the poorest parts of the world, but instead he wants to convey to you that his wife is lovely and pleasant. Gregory, keeping with the theme of being guided by his religious convictions, tells his good friend that he does ask tough questions, but that his faith prevents him from being nasty. Further, his faith tells him that we should always be empathetic to great men when they fall in hard times. If he thinks that maintaining civility is more important than getting an honest answer, then he is not fit to be an interviewer. As is often the case with religious people, he takes his own personality trait and attributes it to what he sees as the correct observance of his religion in order to absolve himself of responsibility. For Gregory, there is no true Scotsman to be found. As for being empathetic to great men, there are definitely times when that is the right thing to do. Clearly, we should refrain from mocking Joe Biden for his gaffes or asking about his presidential ambitions in the immediate aftermath of his son's death. Even in the case of a sex scandal, we should remember that we are talking about people with emotions, and that what this person did, while unfair to his or her spouse, is human, motivated by emotion, and something which does no harm to the public good. However, we absolutely can and should kick people when they're down, if they're down because they've been busted for corruption, or if they're proposing something as disastrous as the Ryan budget. If some politician shows dangerous ignorance or backwards views like Donald Trump, then that person deserves to be exposed and mocked. Or, for the sake of an extreme example, let's say that some theoretical president were to create a massive deficit by giving an unneeded tax cut to the rich, then bungle the defense of America against the most famous terrorist attack in history, then lie us into a major war in Iraq, all the while incompetently conducting another war in Afghanistan, where he appointed the brother of the nation's leading opium dealer to be president. Then the same president also politicizes the Justice Department, botched the response to one of the most destructive storms in American history, sat idly by and watched wages remain stagnant while the cost of living rose, failed to anticipate the collapse of the American economy, bailed the banks out without demanding repayment, left 47 million Americans uninsured without the slightest hint of remorse, never sought to address the underlying causes of the banking collapse, never punished any of the malefactors who broke the law and engaged in illegal practices, and ended his 8 years in office by ignoring the plight of Americans who lost their homes due to the banking crisis. This is surely a figure who deserves to be skewered thoroughly, right? Well, not if you're David Gregory and your faith in God is inspired by George W. Bush. The piece of journalistic genius that Gregory is best known for is his interview with Glenn Greenwald, a whistleblowing journalist who was in communication with Edward Snowden. During his 2013 interview, which he conducted using Meet the Press as his platform, Gregory set up what he thought was a gotcha question by asking Greenwald if he was a lawyer and if it was his legal opinion that Snowden had broken the law. So then, the brilliant Gregory asked, "Are you not a criminal and should you not be in jail?" In response, Greenwald demolished Gregory's credibility and took him to school on what it means to practice journalism. The video evidence is more damning than anything I could say here, so I've provided the link in the description section. The very notion that someone who is supposed to be intelligent and independent-minded could possibly be inspired by an obvious Philistine like George W. Bush should be sufficient grounds for disqualifying that individual from being entrusted with handling the dissemination of the news to the public. But this kind of idiocy is Mr. Gregory's calling card. The upside to his approach to Bush and other politicians who desperately need to be held accountable is that they will talk to Gregory. He has what is called access. The problem is that access they have is to his open rectum. These crooks come in and ram down their talking points with only token resistance. Dick Cheney promotes torture, Ben Carson can deny evolution, and Rick Santorum can advocate for theocracy, and all the while fools like David Gregory will sit there more worried about respecting the feelings of great men than pointing out how the things they are promoting are harmful to the American public interest. If indeed David Gregory's religious views are at odds with his faith, then it is clear that his faith is inadequate to the task of journalism. This has been Thersites of Athens, and I will talk to you more in the future.